addition to that, we have the president of the Fraternal Order of Police for Montgomery County, Tori Cook. If you can record, we let you all have access to be able to record this meeting. In addition to that, if you have questions, please post them in the chat area. We will recognize you and allow you to ask your question. With that, we'd like to start off with opening remarks from County Executive Mark Elrich.
So I just want to welcome everybody here today. We're talking about a change in how we look at use of force and creating an obligation for officers to intervene when they see that force is being applied inappropriately. This is obviously not a new topic. Last summer, we had a forum on policing, and this is one of the things that people talked about, and it's certainly something that we were aware of. We've seen at least one incident in Montgomery County where that the use of force seemed inappropriate and other officers should have intervened. And of course, we've seen it in spades around the country where people have died as a result of inappropriate uses of force. I asked Marcus Jones, our police chief, to work with the union and negotiate a change to our use of force law in order to create the responsibility for officers to intervene. That was not part of the law as it was written before, or not part of the contract that was written before. So Marcus and Tori Cook from the FOP, our local police union, Lodge 35, met and worked between them and their staff and have come up with an agreement which addresses the fundamental issue of people's responsibility. And so I'm just happy to be here and happy that we were able to get this resolved, and good to see that something we were working on before it got pushed into the headlines is actually coming to fruition.
Thank you, County Executive. Chief Jones.
Yeah, so good afternoon to everyone. And I want to thank County Executive Mark Elrich, as well as President Tori Cook of the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 35, for their work and commitment on helping to make this change that I think is vitally important across the country. I know that law enforcement has been tasked with looking at their policies in depth in order to make positive changes that will hold our police officers accountable. And I must say I was very pleased in the collaboration with the Fraternal Order of Police and President Cook's leadership, looking at this issue and coming to a quick agreement that we both could agree upon that would work for his membership and other officers on our department, that for this policy for a duty to intervene in situations where officers are going outside of the scope of their training and going outside of the scope of the policy that has been presented with the use of force. So with that being said, this is a win for this county. And again, I applaud the efforts of working together in a way that is efficient. It gets the officers to understand what the community is demanding of us and how important that is. And for that being said, again, I want to applaud the FOP and thanks to Mr. Elrich for his support in us getting this over the finish line. So thank you.
President Cook, would you like to provide some comments as well?
Good afternoon. I want to thank County Executive Mark Elrich and Police Chief Marcus Jones for holding this press conference. I think it's important for law enforcement to understand that we need to change and to grow with the communities that we represent, and to continually look at our policies and procedures as we move forward into the future. we should always want to improve upon the way we police and how we police communities and how we work with the community. And we should always seek ways to make things better for all individuals and to work together to grow the police department to the point where it's not a organization that is mainly policing and enforcing laws, but also working with the community. So I'm happy that we could make some changes. There's some other changes that we need to make and some other work that we need to do. And I hope we can come together and work to get those done.
Thank you. Remember, if you have a question, please log it in the chat area. I do have a question from Chris Gordon from News Channel 4. Go ahead, Chris.
Unmute. Okay. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yep, we hear you.
All right. Well, this is a very interesting subject, but I'm not sure that you have articulated what the duty is of an officer. You've congratulated each other on this policy, but you haven't really told us what the policy is. And I do have a follow-up. What is the policy if an officer sees another officer using excessive force? What did you do? See what's new.
Do you want to read the?
I don't want to read it.
I'm sorry, I started.
Chief Jones, would you like to? Chief Jones, would you like to take that question?
Yes, I did. I actually started to answer. It was on mute. I'm sorry. Excuse me. The policy states that the use of force of intervention, which went in effect last Thursday, states that it shall be the duty of every officer present at any scene where physical force is being applied to either stop or attempt to stop another officer when force is being inappropriately applied or is no longer required. That is the policy.
Okay, Chief, just in everyday practice, you have almost 40 years on the force. What does that mean and how does it change things?
So what it means is that when an officer is present and he or she observes another officer going outside of the scope of their training and going outside of the force that's allowable by our current policy of use of force, that means that that officer has a duty to stop or attempt to stop that officer from actually utilizing that force at that present moment.
All right, and may I ask President Cook how the rank and file accepts that new duty to basically intervene in the actions of another officer?
Every police officer should expect to intervene when there is force that's used inappropriately. This language just reinforces what should be done and which should have been done in the past. So we're making sure that everybody understands their responsibility when force is applied inappropriately.
And I said I had a follow-up, and then I'll turn it over to the many other reporters I know that are waiting, but both to the chief and to President Cook. We had a situation a year ago in which an officer at a McDonald's was charged with and then convicted of and has now been sentenced for assault for using a knee against the head of a handcuffed suspect. There were other police officers that we see on the scene. What will change in that viral video if we were to see that in Montgomery County?
Well, I would say this, Chris. First I would just say that the officer hasn't been sentenced yet in that case, so that case is still. I mean, he has been convicted, but that hasn't been completed as of yet. But what would have happened would be that, again, if that policy had been in place, that we would have been able to look at that from a perspective of the officer's duty to intervene, to see if they violated that policy. That would have been reviewed, and we would have come to a conclusion. And if that conclusion was that the officers failed to intervene as required, then those officers would have been held accountable and would have been charged accordingly.
President Cook, you agree? What would you tell officers who are on the scene there, you know, handling and attending to the crowd, but not addressing the officer who was using his knee to the back of the cuffed suspect?
First, we got to understand that not every officer saw what occurred. So the ability to enforce this would require that the officer would have to have knowledge. It's been a while. I haven't looked at the video, so I wouldn't be able to give you offhand what every officer was doing there. But I would say that if an officer was looking and paying attention and saw what occurred, then that officer would have the duty to respond to the use of force that was inappropriate.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much.
I don't see any other questions here from media. Are there any other questions? Kevin Lewis from Channel 7 has a question. Kevin, are you unmuted or?
All right, can you all hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So what are the penalties for an officer who doesn't intervene in the future? And are they departmental discipline only, or could there be a criminal component to this?
So Kevin, I'll answer to this degree. Each case is reviewed individually, and if we see that that there was excessive force and that there was not this duty to intervene, the duty to intervene responsibility is more of a policy issue. It is not a criminal. There's no criminal statute that I'm aware of. That would be better answered probably by the state's attorney's office about whether or not they would pursue, depending upon the severity of the actual excessive force that was actually being utilized, and what was the opportunity for that officer to stop that behavior. But it would be a policy infraction from an administrative standpoint, and that would have a wide range of penalties depending upon circumstance, as well as officers' past record that would be reviewed and handled in a fair and impartial manner.
And Chief, just as a quick follow-up, are you aware of any departments, particularly locally or regionally, or even on a national level, that have implemented a policy such as this with cooperation between political leadership, the chief, and the FOP?
I am not so inclined to know if from that perspective that we have all three individuals that you've noted, or positions that you've noted, that have come into this type of agreement, because in many different departments they can implement policy. Not so much, it may not have a union, so they may implement the policy. There might be something between their county executive, mayor, or high-ranking official otherwise, but I'm not familiar with any such agreement as ours at the top of my head, no.
And just one last question. Have you heard from officers who aren't fond of this? And on the contrary, have you heard from officers that think this is a great idea?
I've spoken to, from my perspective, I've spoken to a few officers who think that this is the way to go. This is a responsibility that they should be held accountable to, and think the police department in general. I have not heard from anyone that have stated to me that they think this is a bad policy.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, I have Dan Shear from Bethesda Beat. I do have a couple of other questions out there, but I'm going to start with Dan Shear next.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I wanted to clarify, the county council is also working on a bill that has a clause about officer intervention if they feel another officer is using excessive force. My question is this the same as that council bill, or is this a separate policy? Because I know the press release had said this took effect last Thursday. So are we talking about the same thing, or is the council working on something different?
It's my belief that the council is working on something very similar, though they are putting it into legislation. This is a policy we've been, County Executive Elrich and I have been talking about since last summer. So I would just tell you this has been on our agenda to move this discussion about creating this policy, and the council decided that they wanted to put this into legislation. But again, a little bit of that, well, part of that legislation is policies that we already have in place on this police department or had been working on, such as the intervention policy.
So just to follow up to that, Chief and Mr. Cook, would both of you all be supportive of all of the things that are in that council bill, or is that something you've looked at?
Well, I've looked at it to some degree. I think there still needs to be some clarification in some of the language. This bill needs to be talked about a lot more as it relates to the use of force, deadly force, a part of that bill. But the other two parts of the bill, again, currently those two parts of the bill are already in our policy as it stands today.
Yeah, I agree that there are a couple of things that they have and that the council has that's already in our policy. One would be the lateral vascular restraint or neck chokeholds. Those were taken out of our policy about 20 years ago. So we haven't been doing those, and we haven't supported those in training. So that would be differently, and I agree with Chief Jones that there are some things with the policy, some language that we would have to understand a little bit more before we can, before at least I can say that I would support it or not. So that's where we stand.
And just one more question, Mark, you mentioned that there was at least one incident where you felt excessive force was used. Could you be specific about which incident that was?
That's the one they talked about where the officer's actually been convicted but hasn't been sentenced yet.
Sure, got it.
That was very clear. At least to me, it was very clear.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any additional questions from the media? So if you are with a media organization and you have a question, please list your name and the news organization you're with. All right, if there are no more other questions from the media, County Executive Elrich, I don't know if you want to close us out with some closing remarks.
So this is the beginning of what's going to be a long process. We've are putting together a committee Separate and apart from the ongoing group we were going to create, we're creating a larger committee to look at, in very short order, what policing needs to look like in our community. And we're going to be involving a large group of people and hopefully bringing in some expertise to look at best practices. I am one of those who believes that part of the problem still remains in training. And that if you give people a set of tools and those are the only tools you give people, those are the tools they use. And that if we expect different outcomes, we need to give our officers different toolkits and the expectations that come along with having a different toolkit. So I'm certain that we're going to be taking a close look at how we train people and what we do in that process. And I think, one of the other major issues that I agree, 100% with people who've echoed this around the county, around the country actually, is this whole issue of what the police have been forced to do as government has stepped aside from taking care of the things government's supposed to take care of. So, they wind up dealing with the homeless. They wind up dealing with drugs. They wind up dealing with people with mental disabilities. All of these problems land on the police doorstep. And the only tool they have is to arrest somebody and put them in jail, which in none of those cases solves any problem. And I've seen and talked to homeless people who've been arrested. And I assure you, no matter how many times you arrest and put a homeless person in jail, that experience will not change anything. And so we need to start focusing and doing the job of providing appropriate social services in the hands of people who are the appropriate people to administer the social services and not expect police to deal with all these issues. It's just, I guess it's, there's no nice way to say this. This is a tragic way for all of us to have to finally come to grips with the fact that the police have been saddled with a bunch of things that everybody else walked away from. And we now have to take those things back. We have to own them. I think it's going to lead to a really productive discussion, frankly, because you can't do this and then just hope enough time passes so that we can go back to the way things were. And so we already in this county did a task force on decriminalizing homelessness. And right before COVID hit, we had a report created. Well, now we will take that report and include that in the work that this committee does so we can look at how we can decriminalize homelessness, which basically means providing services to people. I mean, if someone is disruptive and troubled, not doing anything isn't a solution. Having the right person arrive there can help provide a solution. So I think this is going to open the door to us doing things in the way that they should be done. And so I'm looking forward to these changes. I think that over the next, months, that you'll begin to see, evolving changes in the department and the practice of policing that are good for the police officers, most importantly, good for the community. So I look forward to working with both the chief and the union on these, because I know from talking to the union, they're no more happy with doing some of this stuff than anybody else is. They know it's not their job. They know they're not solving anything when they do it. And yet they're the ones we call on to do it. So I think we should make this better for everybody that's involved in trying to make this community stronger and safer.
Okay. It is now 3:03. That'll be it for our questions today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a reminder that tomorrow is our Wednesday weekly briefing with the county executive and Dr. Gales. Please tune in for that one with any additional questions and the like. So thank you very much for attending and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Bye.